Hi, I'm Spiro Skentzos, and welcome to Comic-Con at Home 2020. I'm your moderator for this Intro to TV Writing panel. I hope you found a good seat. You see there are still some seats in the back. You might want to make some room for people. This is the 11th year I've been doing this panel, and this was almost a year without a Comic-Con. When the con reached out about doing a virtual panel at first, I wasn't so sure with our COVID apocalypse and the continued inequality and unrest, like, was it really appropriate? But I thought about it, and I remembered that as writers, as artists, it's our duty to take what we're witnessing and feeling and write about it, to turn it into art, to quell the fire inside of us, to educate and entertain others, and to uplift our voices. So because as writers, we all have something to say, and this panel will help us do just that. At least I hope it will get you started anyway. So let me introduce these awesomely talented people who are going to talk to us about how to put your best script forward. Niceole Levy escaped her childhood in the desert for the bright lights of Los Angeles, originally to study acting, but then realized her true love was writing stories, not playing them out. She worked as a police dispatcher to pay her way through USC undergrad, and then got her master's at USC as well. An alum of both the CBS and NBC writing programs, Niceole has written on Ironside, Allegiance, The Mysteries of Laura, Shades of Blue, Cloak and Dagger, and Fate. She also co-wrote a feature, The Banker, available on Apple TV+. Niceole is currently a supervising producer on SWAT, which airs on CBS. Jaime Paglia is a film and television writer, producer, director, and the co-creator of the record-setting TV series Eureka, the longest running original series in Sci-Fi Channel's history. He was the executive producer, co-showrunner of Scream on MTV. He also served as a co-executive producer on The Flash. Most recently, he was consulting producer for the groundbreaking Netflix Asia series, Nowhere Man, as well as HBO Asia's award-winning drama, Teenage Psychic and Dead Island. He has written original pilots and feature films for many studios and networks, including Netflix, ABC Disney, TNT, New Line, among others. He's currently collaborating with Whoopi Goldberg in a new project for Dark Horse. Letitia Baylor is manager of scripted content for USA, Sci-Fi, and NBCUniversal's streaming service Peacock. She has shepherded groundbreaking, diverse genre series, including Sci-Fi's The Expanse, which I love, The Magicians, Killjoys, 12 Monkeys, and Channel Zero. Currently, she manages USA's Dirty John, Sci-Fi's Chucky, and the Battlestar Galactica reboot for Peacock. She started her career in 2004 as an assistant at Sci-Fi. Originally from Baltimore, she's been a sci-fi nerd before she can even remember, and currently resides in LA with her pit bull mix Phoebe. Last but not least is Bob Goodman. He's a television writer producer currently serving as co-EP on the Fox series 911. Previously, Bob was an executive producer, on Elementary at CBS, and before that wrote and produced Sci-Fi's Warehouse 13. He sold pilots to ABC, CBS, and recently adapted a YA novel for Sam Raimi. Prior to live action, Bob wrote for many years in animation, primarily at Warner Brothers. His credits include Batman, Justice League Unlimited, and Ben 10. He also created and ran the Batman Beyond spinoff, The Zeta Project. He's also written the direct-to-DVD animated features, including the two-part Batman The Dark Knight Returns. Yes. Bob has received 2 Daytime Emmy Awards, as well as an Annie Award nomination for individual achievement in writing. I hope you're all giving them a round of applause from wherever you are. And now let's get into it. Welcome, you guys, and thanks for spending an hour of your Saturday afternoon with me. And let's just jump in. So there are 2 types of spec scripts people usually write. You can write a spec of an existing show or an original pilot. Writing programs usually want a spec of a show, but we'll get into both of these, but let's talk speccing a show first. Why is it important to spec a show when starting out? Who should do this? And Niceole, would you like to start the conversation on this?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in because it is a thing I proselytize about quite a bit. The answer to who should be writing spec episodes of existing shows is every single person who wants to write television as their career. And the reason behind that is it is literally the job you want. You want to walk into a writer's room and have to write an episode of the show with the characters in the world, following the rules, and come up with an interesting story. And if you can do that on your own, you can certainly do it with a writer's room's full support.
So it's about learning the basics of TV writing.
It's about building your craft. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, the quicker you see solutions to story problems. And I think part of the resistance of why people don't want to do it is now that showrunners don't typically read specs as samples for new writers. And I totally get that. I get that they need to invest more time in writing pilots because that's typically what will get you the job. But if you haven't put in the hours writing the specs, your first script will be very difficult. And I say this as someone who wrote 12 specs before she got her first job. And still, my first episode of a real television show was hard work. And thankfully, I had the building blocks to get over the hump.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I agree 100% with everything Niceole said, but I'll add a few other sort of facets to it. One of the other skills you need, when you break through and find yourself on an actual show is emulating that show's voice, emulating the showrunner's voice. And like that is what you're going to get practice doing, studying a show, studying how to write a spec of it. If you were to only spend your time, exercising the muscles to write a pilot, you would never learn that skill, which is kind of job one. I always argue that people should be, when you write a spec, get your hands on copies of the show if you can. The Writers Guild has an incredible library of scripts of existing shows. Nowadays, you can find almost any show's pilot, the script online, and make it your job to get into the heads of the people who wrote this thing, all the way down to punctuation, all the way down to that, that never-ending argument of one space or two after the period. The correct answer, in my opinion, to one space or two after the period is whatever the showrunner says it is.
That's exactly
right. Correct.
Yeah,
it's so true.
It's that level of, sounds like a dirty word, but mimicry that you're going to need to master if you want to work your way up the ranks in TV. The one other thing, I don't want to hog the mic, Niceole mentioned that showrunners nowadays want to read pilots more than specs. I think that's statistically true, but I certainly know that plenty of showrunners are happy to read specs. I'm one of them. And I think you're going to see that increase. Spiro, you've heard me get on the soapbox about this before, that I think that a lot of the push in recent years in the industry to get writers to only write pilots and not specs, I think came originally. I mean, we all kind of picked it up, but a lot of the push was from the representatives. A lot of the push was from managers and agents who were looking for that packaging fee, or in the case of managers, looking to attach themselves as producers. Basically, they look at the writers as though they're panning for gold, as though and this can be very well intentioned. It can be, I'm trying to help this person have a career, and the fastest way to have a career is sell that pilot. But so what they're doing is they're looking for that, that gem. Like I said, they're panning for gold. The problem with panning for gold is, if you extend the metaphor, everyone who didn't write a pilot they can sell today is all the rest of the dirt in that pan. And the agents and reps don't do their jobs for you. And I think as the dynamics shift, the arguments in favor of learning your craft better so that you can get staffed on a show will actually sort of rise back up.
Right, your point being, and the point that you and Niceole have made, is that you need to learn the craft, because if you write a pilot without having learned the craft, your pilot is not going to be that strong. It will not get onto the desks of people who are hiring you and onto the desks of executives.
Yeah, writing a pilot is the hardest thing to do in our jobs. It's so much harder than writing a script on a show, writing a spec of a show, having to if you're doing it well, if you're creating a world and launching it with that story and introducing all those characters, and it's all alone in your room, that is the hardest thing to do. And I think is such a burden to put on young writers, with the expectation that this then be their calling card going forward, or worse yet, that they're going to sell that out of the gate. It's just an unrealistic expectation and a demand.
Great. Yeah, totally. Niceole, go ahead.
I would add too that like I have seen young writers write a really good pilot, like big ideas and execute it really well. And part of the question is, right, how long did they spend working on that script? Right, you can spend 2 years writing an amazing pilot, but if you haven't done the hard work of writing full episodes of existing shows, you still don't know how to do the job you're actually trying to get.
Right. And Jaime, do you want to talk some more about some basic nuts and bolts about writing specs of an existing show? Because, like we're talking, a lot of people start out that way, and it's good to know the format, like know the show you're speccing, the research and the tone and the theme, and how that works, how you see that from your end.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I completely agree with everything that Bob and Niceole were saying. It's like you want to know that you're hiring somebody who gets your show, who can capture the tone of the show, the voices of the characters, because it just makes your life as a showrunner that much easier. I mean, most showrunners at some point, depending on how much time you have, are going to be taking a last pass at every episode that comes in, and so you're in some ways, you're having to be, the air traffic controller who's trying to land all of those scripts that are going to make it to production. And, I think every showrunner has had that challenge of you're partway into a season and you have maybe the more seasoned writers that you can rely on who are writing those first few episodes and you're on track. And then you give a script to someone who maybe doesn't have as much experience or hasn't quite captured the voice yet. And you find yourself looking at what could be a page 1 rewrite as you're starting to go into production. And it just sort of like, it can throw everything off. So for me, I love seeing a great original pilot, but it's really helpful to see, that someone, as Bob was saying, you're emulating the voice of the show creator, and you're a mimic who can actually capture different voices. When I try to see, a dramatic sample of, obviously if it's a drama show, I like to see comedy stuff too, but that is gold to a showrunner when you have, especially a younger writer who's like totally able to, just hone in on the voice. And you're like, okay, I know I can give them a script and it's not going to come back and bite me later on. And you're going to end up going to those writers more often, and you're going to end up being elevated more quickly if you're a part of that. If you're a part of not a part of the problem, if you're actually not creating problems, that's worth its weight in gold.
Look at all the nodding we're all doing. You can tell.
I know.
Don't be a part of the problem.
This is good.
Well, it's a big, and honestly, even to like what Bob was saying, when it comes to punctuation, I happen to be someone who will be completely driven nuts if someone decides that, I like to use ellipses versus dashes when that you've read episodes of the show. And it's like, well, that's not, it's not like you're going to get, most, reasonable people aren't going to, penalize you or fire you for that. But again, you don't want to do stuff that's going to be distracting or irritating. Whatever you can do, whatever you can do to just deliver the best version of that writer's, style, the better served you'll be.
Yeah, showrunner's not going to fire you for wrong punctuation, but it delivers a message. Like I've heard showrunners complain about that. It's like, this writer's been on the show for 2 years. Haven't they noticed that, I don't like ellipses, or haven't they noticed that I put this many spaces after the period? Why do I have to go through the whole script and change that? If they're doing their job, they've noticed how I do it by now.
The one other show that I was hired to run the writer's room on The Flash in the first season. And the first thing I did was read the pilot script, obviously watched the pilot, and then read the pilot script. And there was a very specific way of, double dashes. And that was just like, I happened to be someone that had used a different style before. And I was just like, nope, I'm going to make sure when it's my turn up at bat, they're not going to get distracted by that. That's not going to be a problem.
Right. And Letitia, can you speak from your point of view, just again about writing the spec script and emphasizing how important the research and nailing the tone and the theme, like the Magicians would do a musical episode, but SWAT probably wouldn't. So, you know, you want to make sure that people know their show. And can you just speak to us a little bit more about that?
Well, you know what's funny is I think I've probably read 2 existing specs in my life. We don't read those at the network. We are definitely more originals, you know, because that's how we staff the room and whatnot is usually based on original specs. So it's so funny because I totally understand everything that they're saying. It's so important to have those things, you know, for a writer in a room. But, you know, as I'm staffing people, I just don't read those. I wish I had more to say on it, but it's just not something that we read.
Well, but that's a really interesting perspective, though, I think, to know, because you are in some ways. That's the reason like, I don't know, Bob, what you've done, Nicole. I tend to ask if someone does have a spec of a show, especially if it's in the genre or whatever show I'm working on. I ask for an original and I ask for a spec that's at least in this, you know, the same vein.
You ask for one of each.
I ask for one of each because I want to see. I want to see if they, you know, if they can be a mimic, if they, you know, if they are willing to do the work, because it really is work to study, analyze, break down how someone writes a story, their act structure, their act outs, the voices of the characters, the setups and the payoffs, you know, the difference in you know, the voices of characters, those subtleties. When you see someone who's really, you know, done that well, and you're like, okay, you're doing that in service of somebody else's voice. I think it sort of sends me a message that you're going to do the same thing if I hire you for my show. But at the same time, I want to know what's your original voice and, you know, what your creativity does. Like Bob said, when you're stuck in a room by yourself, banging your head on a keyboard, trying to create a world and characters that are going to resonate with an audience. And so I really like to see one of each. That's what I tend to ask for.
Yeah, I always tell people to just have one spec you love at the ready so that if someone says they want to see one, you got it, right? Why would you not have every tool available to you that could help you in this impossible effort of trying to get a staff job? And I wanted to say, just to add, I know one of the things that I've heard people say about them now, right, in the argument of like why there are so many showrunners who won't read them is, well, there's so many shows now. There's so many shows now.
Yes.
It's impossible for someone to have watched everything. My advice to people is always spec something you love. I don't care if it's popular. Agreed. I don't care. I broke into the business on a spec of The Closer, which everyone was like, nobody watches that show in the industry. And I was like, I don't care. I love it. And that's how I got into the CBS writing program.
Yeah.
And I just read a spec by a young writer that I mentor. And it's not a show I particularly enjoy, but her love of the show is so obvious on the page. She just nailed everything I know to be true about how this show works. And I was like, that's your job. You just did it.
Yeah. And to acknowledge it, although I adamantly disagree with this, there are showrunners who don't want to read specs because they don't think it tells them anything. Because they think that, you know, why do I need to see that this writer can, you know, mimic another show that somebody else put on television? So there is that point of view too. I'm curious to ask Letitia, just back to something you said that you don't see them cross your desk. Would you read them if they did? Is it?
Of course. Yes. If they're submitted to us, I would of course read it. It's not like we actively tell people not to submit them, but we do. We just don't get them. Mostly.
That's just kind of what's coming around. Yeah.
Well, also I think because when you're staffing a room, I feel like when you staff a room, you're looking for different voices to put together. It's like a puzzle, right? And for us, at least, I'm sure you guys all have perspectives on this, but for us, when we're staffing a room, we want to put the puzzle together. You know, is this person good at world building? Is this person funny? Does this person have this? And of course that can be, you know, relayed in a spec from an existing show, but a lot of the times it's more relayed by something that's original. That's just, you know, how we're doing it, but I totally understand you guys. I would actually, now I'm like, maybe I want to read some specs of shows.
Well, do you think then, would you agree that at the lower level especially, people more likely than not will want to read your spec, if you're an unproven, unstaffed writer, an EP will probably want a spec of a show along with an original sample in many cases, because they don't know you. They don't know if you can do that job.
Yeah, that's my perspective on it, at least. And, you know, maybe it's, you know, a more traditional kind of approach to it. But again, it's like, since I don't know you anyway, and you are at the you know, the entry level, the lower levels, you know, that is the job, is to, you know, can you capture what the voice of a show is? That's just helpful. It just tells me, again, I know I know you've got at least the mechanics and the chops to do that, and that's what I really need you to do. And if you you know, also happen to have you know, a brilliant creative mind, or like Letitia said, you know, it's like I look at the, you know, building the writer's room. It's like you've got this big puzzle that you're trying to put together, but you don't have what the final picture is. You don't even know what that is until you sort of figure out what all the pieces are that are sent to you, and you're like, okay, these are the pieces I have. What can I make from that that's going to be cohesive and actually work well together? And you know, it's not just about your skills on the page. It's about the ideas that you have in the room. It's about whether you're funny, or whether you're you know, somebody who is fantastic at story structure, or someone who's just a big idea person, as well as personalities. Because, you know, when you spend 8 hours a day in an enclosed space, as you guys all know, you have to, some people are going to rub each other wrong, and egos get involved. And so, like, you know, that's like a big thing, you know, at least from my perspective, is, you know, we've always had a no douchebag policy, you know, for any writing staffs that we're putting together. And that,
I have that for my life.
yes,
No
it's
douchebag
been really general.
it's you know, it should apply across the board. But you know, if you can put together a room of people that actually enjoy being there, and who like the show, and who do have, you know, all these skill sets, you've got like this giant Swiss Army knife of tools at your disposal that all work, you know, cohesively together. That's the dream room that you're trying to assemble.
Great. And one more thought or question about the spec before we go on and open it more to original pilots is, Niceole, writing the specs, like, it can be frustrating for a writer, because it's like, all right, well, I'm writing something that I don't own, and that's going to be out of date in like 6 to 9 months. But the point is that each time you write a script, you get better, right?
Yes, I think that's 100%. It's, you are training yourself to be a better writer with every script you write, whether it's a spec or a pilot, whatever project you're working on. And so if you write one, you know, certainly you should invest more time in pilots. That is going to get you the most mileage. But if you, I tell people, for every 3 pilots you write a new spec. So that you're refreshed, you have something that's current. And we all have shows we love. It's not that hard. I wrote a spec of Castle in a weekend because I needed a light-toned dramedy spec, and I didn't have one. So I did it because I watched Castle like a crazy person, and it was easy to write.
All right. I do feel like I need to like warn a lot of writers out there, though. Niceole is incredibly talented and fast. That's like one of those things that,
I mean, I didn't sleep literally for 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, I had to write the series finale of Eureka in a weekend. And that was still challenging, having already built the world and knowing the characters and the voices and all that stuff. That's a tall order to do. Give yourself 2 weeks. It's just like, to be reasonable. Don't kick yourself if you didn't do it in a weekend.
Absolutely. But I think if it's, sorry, Spiro, I was going to say, if it's a show you love, it's not going to be
easier.
This Herculean task.
Yeah.
You're just like, I always wish they told this story, so write it.
And I think that's a great way to think of it too, Niceole, is that if it's something that you already love, and you know the characters and you know the whole show, you're going to be that much better at it. It's going to come across on the page.
Yeah, and it's going to come quicker, like you're saying. Yeah.
Let's talk more about the original spec. How do those work, and what purpose they serve? You know, how are they looked at from the executive side? You know, and just as much as the EP side. And someone talked to me about how important are the first 10 pages?
Oh, God.
Well, how important are the first 10 minutes of a show? It all depends on when you want to, you know, where your turnoff point is. I think it's very important. You know, you set up the show in the first 10 minutes. There's a lot you can do in the first 10 minutes. You can set up the show, you can set up the character, even if it's the teaser is something completely ridiculous and has no really bearing on the show. It sets up the tone of the show. So I personally think the first 10 minutes or the first 10 pages are extremely important to reel that person in. But I read beyond that, obviously, but I feel that they're very important.
I love that you said obviously, but I want to ask you a question, another question, Letitia. See, I'm actually interviewing Letitia.
That's my job.
You guys are all
to
at
ask her the question.
That's okay. Bob and I go way back.
Here's a way of answering how important the first 10 pages are, or we'll get to it. Letitia, how many scripts do you have to read a week?
A week?
Yeah.
On a regular week.
Yeah,
I don't
if life
know.
is going normally, yeah.
Or during pilot season.
I would say 10 to 20, maybe.
Okay, and for sometimes you hear a much bigger number than that.
Well, those
but
are
20,
like 10 to 20 that we get submitted, and then obviously I have all my current shows, and that can be anywhere from
Right.
nothing to 4 or 5 scripts a week.
Right.
But the point that Bob's getting
some
to
dailies
is-
and some post, like this, and some meetings and like.
I'm not saying I read all scripts from page 1 until the end. I'm just saying I read more than 10 pages.
But that also,
Yeah.
that also though, again, underscores your point of it's really important to hook you
It really is.
as when you know that you've got a stack that's waiting for you.
Mhm.
If you want someone like you who's in a position to actually make or break somebody's, entry into a show, you want to be hooked so that you read as much as possible.
Right. There are
Yeah,
plenty
there
of
are shows that I
executives-
start reading, there are specs that I start reading, and I know for a fact we will never do this, but it is so good that I have to read the end. I have to read to
And
the end.
that's the best.
That's a
you can
good
do.
compliment for a writer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
great.
what you want.
Mhm.
Like as a
And
writer,
there-
you want that.
Yeah.
You definitely hear execs say, I know by a few pages in whether this writer can write. I know whether I care.
100%.
And they will stop reading if they're not enjoying it by that point, or if they don't think that, obviously you hope, as Letitia just said, that an exec's eye is primarily on, is this good writing? Is this a good writer? If you're using it as a staffing sample. But if someone is, tossing that script in the reject pile 5 pages in, well, then it doesn't matter if you had a really big finish. If you paid off really well, they never got to it.
Right.
Exactly.
And Niceole, don't you think that that again, going back to writing the scripts and everything, that's the writer's job. Your job is to hook them and to keep them reading, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the task, right? Especially if you work, I guess in any form of television, right? But certainly if you work in broadcast, you better get them hooked, before you go to the first commercial break, or they're going to go click and turn on a different show. And unless you're, some obsessive fangirl about the show, like I am about many. So it's like your job is to make someone say, I have to come back and see what happens next.
Right.
And it's that, in every build through the script, when you get to every act out, it's like, even if you're not putting act outs in your script, you should still be writing like there's act outs, and what's the thing that's going to keep people watching and not turn to something else.
Right. So here's a couple of questions to throw out to the group. So what do you have to do to make your script stand out? And what do you want to see, don't want to see in the script when you're a reader?
My number one don't want to see is I don't want to see a woman described as she's pretty, but she doesn't know it.
She doesn't know it.
That's
But she doesn't know it.
Right. I roll my eyes because there are better ways to describe women than that. That's it. That's really my biggest don't.
No cliches.
Great. Let's talk also about, this is something that I know Niceole and I have spoken a lot about through being in similar writing programs, is the importance about writing what you know, writing from personal experience and emotional truths, and how that works in your original pilot, even in a spec, and what that can do for you and your voice.
Well, there are kind of two sides to that idea of writing what you know. The one that I think people tend to go to when they hear that phrase, and this is very valid, it's certainly important, is if you're writing a script, if you're writing a spec, a pilot, you want to provide something unique. You want to write something that only you could write. So if you can find something in your own life experience that you're going to bring to the table that no one else has, can contribute, then that's fantastic. There's also kind of a broader point to make about writing what you know. You know, like I've done a lot of writing aliens and guys who fly around in capes, and I'm not one of those, but I can still write it because what I know in that case is authentic emotional experience. I'm finding myself and what I can relate to in these characters, and that's always the foundation of the story.
The emotional experience.
Yeah, so that's kind of the way you should think about writing what you know too. You know, if you're writing a character or a character with an emotional point of view that you have no foothold into, that you've just never experienced anything like that, maybe it's not what you should be writing, or maybe you should figure out what your emotional connection to that character is, because that's what you've got to convey to the reader.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, right, it's something I've told some of the writers I mentor is, it's what's the thing that interested you about this in the first place? Like, make me feel what mattered to you about this area, whether you've lived through it or not. You read an article and something caught your attention. Make me feel that. Make me understand why this made you stop and say, I have to talk about this.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially important when you get into the meetings too. Like I sold a pilot this last cycle to ABC, and it started off a very academic, you know, nonfiction psychology book that I had read about an area that really interested me. And, you know, whatever, 99% of that wasn't in the pilot. It was just sort of the birth of the character, but it made for a very passionate pitch meeting and made for great conversations with the executives. So that expands beyond the page.
Hey, Bob, I'm curious, did you pitch it first, or did you spec pilot?
No, I pitched it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are just got time for a couple more questions. I didn't realize this would go by so fast online. It seems like
Always
it would
does.
feel longer, but it goes by fast. So, all right, let's talk about fighting the odds and getting into writing programs and getting staff. Like, you just don't walk in and do that, right?
I mean, I know very few people who have just walked in and done that.
Yeah.
So I will admit, that I got very, very lucky. And Letitia, I think you were there from the very beginning of Eureka.
I was.
You know, I had started off, you know, working in feature film publicity, decided to start writing feature film scripts, got, you know, sold, you know, a spec, and then a couple more specs, but, you know, wasn't getting them into production. You know, you would get into that. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. You know, you have all the attachments and the actors and the director, and everybody says it's a go, and then one element falls out and the whole house of cards comes down.
Yep.
So we happened to pitch the idea for Eureka to Sci-Fi Channel, to Mark Stern, shortly after he had taken over the network. And it was, I think, the right idea, sort of at the right time with the right executive in the network. And I went from being, you know, a feature writer to a TV, you know, writer, executive producer, you know, without having ever been in a writer's room. And, you know, and so for me, I was relying on, I was like a sponge. I wanted to absorb all of the talents and the skill sets and the experiences of everybody else who had been going through that process from writer's assistant up the ladder. And, you know, you get tossed into the deep end, it's sink or swim. And luckily, you know, we figured out how to swim, but,
Definitely.
It was, you know, for me, I am, you know, incredibly grateful to the writing staffs that, you know, you're in charge of hiring and staffing and those first seasons who, you know, you're like, I get that you have all this experience, and I'm, you know, I'm going to do the best that I can to learn from it and then apply it, and then be at a point where, you know what you're doing.
Right.
The thing about it being tough odds, I mean, the answer is kind of in the question. The odds are really, really tough. Yeah. And Sam Simon, the creator of The Simpsons, said that success in Hollywood is a combination of 5 things in this order: dumb luck, hard work, tenacity, who you know, and then maybe talent. And I think it's a really accurate list that, you know, it really, it's first and foremost, it's just luck. But you do make your own luck with, you know, preparation and at-bats. Yes, with the other things, with the hard work and the tenacity. And you really just kind of have to throw everything you can at the wall. You have to be out there applying for all those assistant jobs and you know, script writers PA jobs, and applying to all the programs. Like, you know, you've even heard Niceole came through, and Spiro, I know you did. And it's you got to try everything, because there's a lot of people, and you know, it's a very small game of musical chairs with a lot of people trying to sit in those chairs. So
leave no stone unturned.
And stick with it.
Yeah. As we wrap up, let's talk for a minute about the day-to-day of being a writer, like starting off writing in a vacuum and trying to stay engaged and fighting doubt, especially in this age of shut-in. Any type of advice, ideas of how you got started, things that keep you motivated, or where you go to find that inspiration?
You know, it's funny. I was deep in my pilot process. I had a very difficult outline process with this pilot, and I was having one of those, like, oh my God, this project's going to kill me, whatever. Right about the time that Glen Mazzara tweeted about his experience with, and now I can't, the Dark Tower, and the Dark Tower getting passed on, and all the work he had done, and all that stuff going into it, and I was so heartened by having someone like him share that, and just a reminder that, like, it's always hard. This is always hard. It's hard when you're starting out. It's hard when you're Glen Mazzara. It's like, it's always going to be hard. And so you get through the hard days, and then you're like, oh, look at what I wrote. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I remember Mark Gordon on a panel once. He was, you know, and I can't even remember how many hundreds of hours of television he had produced at that point. And he was just like, listen, even me at this point, having, you know, a breadth of experience and a track record, if I sell 1 out of 10 pitches in a season, that's pretty good, you know, odds, you know, and, you know, that is the reality, you know, even though that there are so many extra platforms now and streamers and markets to be able to go to, there's still that much more content and people that are vying to get in those spots. So
it's like the odds are not in your favor, but if it's what you want to do, and if you're driven to do it, then you have to keep doing it.
Yeah. I think I've told this story before, but like right before things really started to happen for me, I had this like moment where I thought, well, maybe this isn't my thing. Maybe I've been wrong about this writing thing, and it's not going to be my journey. But I realized I would still write even if nobody ever paid me for it. So it's like, sometimes you just have to go back to that place, right? Like, even if no one ever paid me again to write a page, I would still write. So why not try to get paid for it?
Yes.
And just put up with the rejection that comes along with it.
And you also just, you asked not just about the rejection part of it, but also just the hard work of the, you know, like the quiet days. And for sure, like there are days when I will sit on this very sofa and stare at the ceiling all day and not get a lot of words on paper. But after a couple of those, maybe then the words start flowing, and you just have to stick with it. You have to put in the hours, even if it feels on some days like there wasn't a lot produced in those hours. You're still doing the work. You're still thinking. You're still figuring it out. And it is hard work. So don't beat yourself up about it being hard.
And I don't know about you guys, but you know, to your point about also being isolated right now, I kind of have to make myself have a schedule as if I was going into a writer's room and I have, you know, all of these deadlines to meet. I try to say, okay, I'm going to have, you know, I know I'm going to get up at a certain time. If I'm going to, you know, exercise, do that, do the chores, do the bills or whatever. And then I'm going to sit and have a concentrated period until lunch. And that's when, you know, whether I'm outlining and I want to get through, an act of story beats, or whether I'm trying to get to a certain ideal number of pages that I just want to like get written in a day. Or like Bob said, I know I'm going to use today to sit in my chair and just stare at the wall and the ceiling and really think hard about it until I break through that point where I know I can start to, deliver on the page. If I don't have a schedule or some kind of roadmap, I can definitely get spun off into those eddies and be stuck there for hours or days on end.
Keeping a routine is important. Don't go down a YouTube hole, researching stuff that is not important to you.
Even for me, it's like, it is like, okay, I'm going to turn off my phone and I'm going to close my internet browser so that I'm not even tempted, or if I turn off my alerts. So every time, the Cheeto in chief, does something ridiculous and it pops up, I'm not tempted to click on it and, see what other dumpster fire has been set.
Yeah, nowadays, not paying attention to the news sometimes is the only way to get it. The only way. Yeah.
And by the way, if you do go down the YouTube rabbit hole, like just be kind to yourself afterwards and be like, okay, so today was that day.
That's true.
Sometimes you need that day. Like sometimes your brain just needs to think it's completely disconnected from your work. Typically, it's not completely disconnected, and like somewhere along the YouTube rabbit hole, you're like, oh, that might be something, right? Yeah. And then you write it down.
You don't know where the idea will come from.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we need to wrap up because they're trying to push us out of the room to make room for the next panel right now.
Marvel has a new movie to premiere in this room.
So we're out of time, but I just really wanted to thank you guys again for being part of this. It was great to see you. This will stream on the Comic-Con YouTube channel in July and for the rest of eternity. So you all, thank you very much for doing this, and take care, and we'll see you next year at Comic-Con.